That's working, yes. It's always possible to come up with a segue to something in the Torah because the Torah connects to everything. So there's always a segue if you just look hard enough. And that means the Torah always has an answer if you just look hard enough. So we are in Parashat Beshalach, and this is where we are leaving, finally, or rather to say we have left, but our departure has been incomplete to this point, right? We left Egypt, but leaving Egypt and leaving Egypt are two different things. That is to say, leaving the Egyptian political dominance, we've done that, but we still have to geographically get out of Egypt and make our way to a place where we can feel safe, that we will not be harassed or destroyed. And to do that, well, what's the most important part we've got going for us right now? God. Well, yes, but geographically, what is the most important thing we need to do? Well, the desert's right in front, right? So perhaps a little rough geography will help. Right, so that's boom. Right, so this is what we normally call Sinai. Right, that's the big Egypt. Right, that's the Dead Sea. Right, and so we got to go from here to there. And we've already discussed that there are sort of two options. Earlier we've talked about this, that there are sort of two options of how we can get there. One is to take the coastal road, and the other is to take the wilderness road and come up like that.
Oh, the long way.
Well, yes, it is longer. This is definitely much more used, much more frequently trafficked. We know that from archaeology and other historical documents that was a major highway of the ancient world. Now, God tells us that we're not going this way because that will lead us directly into war, and we as a nation are not ready for that yet. God does not want us to go to war, because if we go to war and things go bad, we're going to make a U-turn and come back to Egypt, because apparently that's just where we are mentally. So instead, we're going this way. Now, that sounds perfectly fine for us today, and for anybody who's ever zoomed out on the map, it looks like an easy shot. Just walk across the desert, right?
Yeah, right.
Except there are numerous, especially in the ancient world from what we can tell, marshes that are saturating that area along the southern area of the border between Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula. And that means we've got to get our group of people through that watery area. And that means it's got to step aside. It's got to part for us. It would take a miracle for us to be able to do this, which is going to lead us to one of the biggest miracles ever. Now, we're not going to really go into the depths, it's a pun, the depths of that miracle, but I do want to talk about why we're doing that miracle and what we mean when we say miracles in general, and a little bit more of where are the miracles today. But that means we're going to be starting on page 401 in the Eitz Chaim, 401, and we're going to begin with chapter 14. Everybody fine? We're on chapter 14, verse 1, page 401 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash. Good. Narrator?
All right. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp before Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, before Baal Zephon. You shall encamp facing it by the sea." Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, "They are astray in the land. The wilderness has closed in on them. Then I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, that I may gain glory through Pharaoh and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." And they did so.
All right, so apparently we were leaving, and we've made a bit of a U-turn. And that's giving the impression that we are nivuchim, that we are confused. That's the title from Rambam's very famous Guide for the Perplexed, right? That we are perplexed. It's like we're trying to go home and we forgot the way to get there. So Pharaoh sees us driving in circles and thinks, this is perfect. Now, strategically, those of you who have ever studied anything from ancient military sources, or even up until the modern times, will know that if you're able to trap your opponent up against a water feature, that you now have them neatly penned in. So the idea that us being up against this sea area would entice Pharaoh to come out and attack us makes perfect sense strategically. Right? This is a very good decision that Pharaoh is about to make. Even though we've talked before about the hardening of the heart, is essentially redoubling Pharaoh's efforts to do what Pharaoh would want to do were he not afraid. This is something that should make him very confident that what he is about to do is a good decision. We're good? Onward.
When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his courtiers had a change of heart about the people and said, "What is this we have done, releasing Israel from our service?" He ordered his chariot and took his men with him. He took 600 of his picked chariots and the rest of the chariots of Egypt, with officers in all of them. The Lord stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he gave chase to the Israelites. As the Israelites were departing defiantly, the Egyptians gave chase to them, and all the chariot horses of Pharaoh, his horsemen, and his warriors overtook them and camped by the sea near Pi-hahiroth before Baal-zephon.
Okay, so a couple of things to notice here. One is who decides to attack the Egyptians first, or rather in terms of the order. Does God harden Pharaoh's heart first, or does Pharaoh decide to attack first?
Oh, right.
God?
No, he decides to attack.
God makes his heart strong-willed.
God tells Moses, "I will do this."
Right. So Moses is already saying, "I will." Yes. So God has said to Moses, "I'm going to do all this."
Right. But when does it actually say in the text that God hardens Pharaoh's heart?
After Pharaoh leaves.
After Pharaoh has said, "What did we do letting them go?"
Then, yeah.
Then it's hardened, right? So Pharaoh chooses his course of action, and then God sort of locks him into carrying through with his course of action. So again, it's not that God is deliberately forcing Pharaoh to do this. He's simply saying, "All right, if that's the way you want it, I'm not going to encourage you to have second thoughts. Go for it. Let's see how this works out for you." So these important subtleties of the text are well, important. That's why the text demands of us a more careful reading than just casually browsing through it and thinking whatever first comes into our mind. Now, you can see then that we have the Israelites essentially trapped against this sea-ish area, and the Pharaoh coming with the might of the Egyptian army, which chariots are nothing to laugh at. I know we all, laugh at the Ben-Hur chariot races and think, chariots.
Tanks of that time.
They were essentially like a tank, right? They were a mobile artillery platform. They could circle and maneuver and strafe you with arrows, and the speed gave them an advantage that a regular person couldn't. And given that we had not only no chariots, we had no cavalry, and really, as many gifts as they were giving us, they were probably not giving us gifts of bows and arrows and spears and shields. We were an unarmed mob that had very little chance to stand up to a well-drilled army of Egypt, which was one of the things that allowed Egypt to project much of its influence all the way up into much of what we call the modern Middle East. Comment? Question?
Well, in the previous chapter does say that the children of Israel went up armed from the land. Were they armed with God's protection? Is that their main armament? Right. Is God is their shield at this point?
And the idea of them being armed as a military threat to Egypt itself,
that's not
no. Whatever few weapons they had, because we know they eventually will fight the Amalekites. We know they eventually will fight some of the other people during the wandering. Yes, they had something, but did they have anything like the weaponry needed to defeat the Egyptians? No. If they had, they would have simply stayed in there and conquered Egypt.
These days we call it asymmetric warfare.
We would call that now, or you could call it a massacre, which is what Pharaoh's planning.
I know some people, don't they take the position that the word armed means stiff?
Yes, the chamushim that's used there to mean armed is debated by the commentators. It's a term debated by the commentators of whether that is actually saying that they were armed or whether it was simply talking about the organizational group of them. Like I said, we do know later on that they have some weapons. Exactly where those came from and how, well, that's why we get to argue and debate. It's one of the joys of Jewish study.
Hollywood has a different angle on that.
Really?
Yeah, no, I'm talking about the last Exodus movie.
Which last one? You mean Charlton Heston?
No,
I
the
mean,
one,
the animated
few
one,
years
Prince of
ago.
Egypt? Oh, that one?
Kings.
I never
and
even saw
Gods.
that one.
You didn't see it, you should see it. Because it puts Moses was a prince, an Egyptian prince.
He was
And he
raised,
was
yeah.
a general.
For 40 years, he was
Yeah.
raised as an
And
Egyptian.
as Egyptian prince and a warrior.
Mhm.
So to say that, and okay, that's Hollywood version, you know, that he trained the Israelites and created for them weapons, bows and arrows and crude, you know, armor, you know,
Right.
and stuff like that, but no carriages. or
No
horses.
chariots,
Yeah.
right.
So that's, we don't know. We never been there.
We don't know, although we're going to see the people's reaction in just a minute. They don't sound like seasoned soldiers ready for a fight.
No, they were slaves.
I was thinking they would have gained arms by going to, what's his face in Midian? Because Yitro, because all of those weapons for almost all the Middle East were produced at the forges of
Right.
the lot.
Right, the copper mines.
Huh?
The copper mines that create the
copper
to create the
mines,
bronze.
mines.
Right.
I mean, they were all right there. And his wife, he had sort of an in.
Right, but as I was just saying to Yara, when we look at the reaction of the people, they don't sound like they're ready for a fight.
Right.
Which, if you remember, was exactly why God told them, we're not taking the coast road, because you're not ready for a fight. So, when we get to verse 10, we're going to see their response.
As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them. Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, 'Let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians'? For it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." But Moses said to the people, "Have no fear, stand by and witness the deliverance which the Lord will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will battle for you. You hold your peace."
All right, so Moses says, don't be afraid. God's going to deliver, and you should know by now, trust God, everything's going to be fine. And the people are like going, what, we couldn't have died back in Egypt? You had to bring us out here to die? Right? We don't want to die. We don't want to die. And that's pretty much what they're looking at as their only option right now. We got the tension built. Okay, now we get a third voice coming back in. We've had the Israelites, we've had Moses, and now God chimes in.
And then the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me?"
Now, wait a minute. Wasn't Moses just defending God's honor?
Yeah, he was.
Right? Wasn't he saying to the Israelites, don't worry, God's got it. God will deliver us. God, like, Moses, why are you talking about? But I'm saying good stuff about you. They're the ones. Why am I in trouble? Well, because God has a particular idea.
Look, tell the Israelites to go forward, and you lift up your rod and hold out your arm over the sea and split it, so that the Israelites may march into the sea on dry ground. And I will stiffen the hearts of the Egyptians so that they go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his warriors, his chariots and his horsemen. Let the Egyptians know that I am Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen.
All right. So first of all, we've discussed in previous classes the non-Hollywood version of what this would look like. That is to say, the separation of the waters does not necessarily mean that we have giant 8,000-foot tall mountains of water on each side with whales swimming past in them. Prince of Egypt, beautiful artwork, lousy theology. But the idea that God is trying to say here is that the water is going to split in a way that will allow the Israelites to go through. It will be so surprising that you would expect the Egyptians to go, whoa, I'm not going there. And yet God's going to give them the courage to keep doing what they want to do, which is to attack and destroy. And that's going to lead them into a trap that will allow them to be wiped out as in military force. Everyone got the picture? Okay. So what is this exchange telling us then about how God interacts with the world? Because this is held up as being one of the main symbols of God interacting with the world. Every single day we say Micha Mocha, which comes from the Song of the Sea. Who is like you, God, doing wonders? Right? This is the wonder. If you're going to list wonders, this is the wonder that has captivated so many artists, whether it be for books or for poetry or for paintings or for movies, to try and show God's ability to bring deliverance to the world, and especially to the oppressed. But what do we actually know about God and how God wants this to happen and how God is accomplishing it? Right? It actually is more complicated than that. We hold it up as the symbol of God will deliver people from oppression, and yet there are so many more intricacies to what's happening in this exchange, from God telling Moses, don't cry out, when we were told earlier that crying out is what got God's attention, for God telling Moses to go through, but Moses has to hold the rod. Well, why does Moses have to hold a rod at all? To the idea of the sea parting. Why can't we just walk on water? I hear that's popular. To all of the different things that will go on into making this miracle happen. And what does that mean about how God interacts with God's world? All right, so that is where we're going to pause in the Torah and move to our commentary. Sarah? We'll see which side can distribute fastest.
Yeah.
I had a professor that used to always say that her test for the intelligence of the class was to send out 2 handouts that were different in opposite directions and see whether the class could actually make sure everyone got one. Because invariably someone would take it and put one down and forget to pass it on because they were taking and like, come on, guys. All right, good. All right, so we're going to begin with Ramban. Now, this is a commentary from the previous chapter, but I think you'll see it has quite a good bearing on what we're discussing.
From the overt major miracles, man comes to a realization of the hidden miracles, which are the foundation of the Torah. For a person has no portion in the Torah unless he believes that all our matters and circumstances are miraculous, that they do not follow nature or the general course of the world. This is true regarding the nation and the individual.
Okay, so a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
All right, so first of all, one of the major things that Ramban is trying to say in that very first sentence is that one of the reasons why the Torah bothers with flashy miracles at all is because when you look at the flashy miracles, you are supposed to recognize the non-flashy miracles. Right? When you think of Micha Mocha, who is like you that parted the sea, you are supposed to also think, who are like you that has given me bread to eat? Who is like you that allows my body to pump blood and make oxygen, get to my limbs? You are supposed to recognize that all of that is miraculous. And by that, this is the second more radical part that most of us don't think about in the modern world, but was a very common belief in many, many communities, not only Jewish. By that, he also means that everything that happens is not just happening, but that God wills it to happen. Right? When your body continues to live because you put food into it, that isn't because you are following the laws of nature. It is supernatural. It is a miracle. And do not be deceived by the structure of nature looking like it's doing the heavy lifting. In fact, God is making that happen. And the patterns that we see in nature are really an illusion, a disguise to God's miracle. It is absolutely as miraculous as the seas parting. There is a wonderful synopsis of this position in the Muslim world from the Middle Ages in Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed, where he talks about the position being that if you take a piece of cloth and you dump it into black dye and you pull it out and now the cloth is black, do not believe that the dye caused the cloth to become black. God made the dye become black. Right? It didn't happen because of any chemical interaction. It happened by God's will. Full stop, period. Everything is a miracle, no matter how natural it may look. And that's really what Ramban is arguing here, is that everything is a miracle, no matter how natural it looks. And that those miracles happen for the nation, meaning the survival of the people, and the individual, meaning the survival of that particular person. No one got out of Egypt just because they happened to be standing in the right place at the right time. God picked everybody to be part of that deliverance. No one was just a lucky happenstance, that it was all individual providence, not only national providence. And that distinction between individual and national is a topic of debate. So if you're thinking to yourself, I'm not sure if I buy this, that's okay. There are many commentators who also don't buy this and feel that this level of particularism in the miraculous is a little overstated.
But it seems like not until much later on in the Tanakh they start talking about punishing people individually, right? Or rewarding them individually, right?
Yes.
Like all the beginning is they punish and reward them as a group.
Well, the idea is for this school of thought is that it has happened simultaneously, right? That an individual can be rewarded and punished, and a group can be rewarded and punished. Those are not mutually exclusive. So your nation may be doing well, and you may be doing badly because you're a particularly bad person. Or your nation may be doing badly, but you're doing well because you're a particularly good person. Or you may be able to leave your nation and move to another state in order to survive the catastrophe. So having those happen simultaneously is the general position of that school of thought.
Or as Adam and Eve had to leave the Garden of Eden, they had to because they did something wrong also, and then move something else, and then we see the group. So it's really, even from the beginning, it's both
group
ways.
and individual.
Yeah, I just wonder how we don't see individual stuff till much later on, though, right?
Of course we do. We see Abraham being rewarded individually. We see Jacob being rewarded. What?
I mean, as far as the Israelites.
Well, we are going to see very quickly the idea. As far as the Israelites, we've only been Israelites since the beginning of the book of Shemot. So it's a little hard to speak of the long history up to this point. But immediately after this, where we start seeing more personalities and characters, we get Nadav and Avihu, the two sons of Aaron, who get punished individually, even at the moment of the nation succeeding. And we see the nation failing as a group with regards to the golden calf, even though some of the people were still behaving righteously, namely the Levites. So we see a mixture of individual versus national behavior almost immediately upon the creation of the Israelite nation. So I don't know that there's much of a window where it's only one or the other. All right, onward. This time we're now from the Vilna Gaon.
Even the way of nature is directly controlled by God's judgment and divine providence. However, nature is the messenger. For when it is decreed that this one will become rich and this one poor, God arranges it that this one loses his money and this one finds it. He does not cause a miracle that money is instantly created and for the other, the money floats away to heaven. This is nature. All
right, so the Vilna Gaon, who sits at the threshold of the modern era, is finding a way to accommodate the opinion that Ramban had, who was much earlier, with what we seem to be experiencing in the more modern and contemporary life. Which is to say, it seems to be that nature is handling a lot of this stuff, right? That's the whole point of figuring out the laws of nature, of what makes one thing healthy, what makes one thing sick, what makes plants grow, what makes plants die. It doesn't seem to be any supernatural effect. It just seems to be a natural effect. That's why we have the distinction between natural and supernatural. And what the Vilna Gaon is saying is that what appears to be natural is still coordinated and orchestrated by the supernatural, by God. And so it may seem like a natural thing that you lost your job and you became poor, but in fact, that was orchestrated by the conductor. And you may not have noticed the twirl of the baton, but absolutely it is playing those notes because of the conductor. Nature didn't come up with that on its own. And that's his sort of accommodation to this point of view. And he's going to give a very powerful metaphor.
Yeah, imagine a king sits in his palace, and from his vantage point, he can see a man and an animal off in the distance. He can send wheat to the man through a series of different plans and barley to the animal. They only see the cause immediately preceding their reception of food, and they think this reason is the sole reason they received it. So too, the king may have a trap set. The fool imagines that an unfortunate accident had occurred to him, but this too is simply sort of nature bringing about poisonous food.
right? So it may feel like it was just a natural event, but in fact, it was coordinated behind the scenes. So really, Vilna Gaon is still on the side of Ramban, the idea that everything is orchestrated down to the minute details. And it may look like it was coincidence, it may look like chance, but in fact, it was all very carefully crafted in order to create the desired effect. How are we doing so far? Okay, good, because now we're going to get a contrary voice. We're going to go to actually Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed. This is Rambam, also known as Maimonides. And he's going to lay out, as he often does, a broader range of opinions that he has studied before he gets to the conclusion of what he believes is the right version.
Some claim there is no divine providence at all, and everything is merely a result of chance. This view is pure heresy.
All right, so he doesn't mince words, because why would you do that? His point is that if you say that God has no impact whatsoever on the world, none, zilch, zero, right? The world just keeps going as the atoms and molecules bumping into each other do. And the energy flows as the laws of nature say, and it doesn't matter what God wants, it doesn't matter what God doesn't want. The world is just going to keep randomly existing. That is, in his opinion, pure heresy, right? Because you are denying not God per se, because you can all offer the idea that God exists, but you are denying that God cares for this world and has any sort of directional intention for this world. And to remove that is to essentially remove the purpose that God has for creation, and that is rather heretical. We do believe that God cared enough to give us instructions, and therefore to deny that God has any impact on the world kind of breaks that entire system. All right, so hopefully clear enough why Rambam thinks that's heresy, to say that God has just turned his back on the world? Okay.
Others believe that there is divine providence over some things, but others are left to chance.
Right, so there's a second view, and that second view says some things God cares about, and lots of other stuff God doesn't care about, and that just sort of randomly happens. All right, we're going to sort of circle back to that position in a moment.
A third view believes that nothing is the result of chance, not specific individuals nor general groups. Rather, everything is divine will. A fourth view is the opinion of those who believe that all divine acts are a result of a divine wisdom which can bear no injustice. And this leads them to believe absurdities. They say about a guiltless mouse that is eaten by a cat or a bird that God decreed this fate for this mouse, and God will compensate this mouse in heaven for what happened.
All right, so you might be able to tell Rambam is not supportive of that particular view, right? So, and notice that there's a distinction there. One group, the third view, right, says that nothing is chance, that everything is according to divine will. The fourth group says not only is everything according to divine will, but everything is according to divine justice. And that's where he says you begin to get a little crazy. Because if you say that God made that mouse die for justice, then you've got to create a rather elaborate drama of what in the world the mouse has done or not done, or how the mouse will be compensated in an afterlife in order to explain how the death of this mouse was just. And that Rambam thinks is an untenable position, right? You're not really going to be able to come up with a strong argument of how that is the case, right? Okay, and then of course he's going to present the fifth view, which you might guess is his own.
The fifth is the Torah's view.
Which you know must mean it's his opinion, because you say it's the Torah's view to say it's my view, right?
That man is completely in control of his actions. He has complete free will and acts on his own accord. And everything that occurs to man is fitting to occur.
All right, so he is adding in a very important notion that we haven't had up to this point, and that's called free will. Because up to this point, his argument has been that the other groups have said that everything that happens is according to divine will. Well, if everything happens according to divine will, what role does my will play? And what Rambam is saying is that, well, actually for humans, your will plays rather a big portion. Right? You actually are in more control of what happens to you than a mouse. And not just because you're smarter and have more capabilities than a mouse, but because you have been given a freedom of choice, a freedom of decisions that the mouse wasn't given. And that means that you have a higher level of responsibility and interaction with the divine through your use of your will. he goes on and says,
only humans are governed in every detail of life and all good and bad that occurs to him in accordance with what he deserves.
Right? So what happens to us is part of a divine will, but it's a divine will that is in balance with our will. So as we choose good, that allows or encourages, triggers a response of divine will that will also be more beneficial. And the opposite is also held true. Now, Rambam goes on in much other detail to point out that that doesn't mean that you should always expect that the most righteous will have the happiest lives, because there are many other things that are influencing it, namely the bad acts of the people who are using their free will to hurt the righteous, but other things as well can happen. But that we will find, all other things being equal, that righteousness will generally lead to a better life and wickedness will generally lead to a worse life. Again, all other things being equal.
However, regarding all other animals, and even more so the plants and other inanimate objects, I do not believe that this specific leaf falls as a result of divine providence, nor that this spider devours this specific fly as a result of a divine decree on this individual fly. Rather, all of these are completely chance.
All right, so he ends up with a position which says there is divine providence in balance with human free will, but the rest of the world is governed according to the rules that God put in place, known as, we would call them the laws of nature, and that has an element of randomness to it. And therefore, I can't say that fly deserved to be caught by that spider, or that leaf deserved to fall from that tree, nor, and this is the part where he departs from others like Ramban, can I say God made that leaf fall for his purpose. Rather, that leaf fell because it's just following what leaves do. And God wasn't invested in making the leaf plummet at that particular moment. How are we doing on that distinction? Right? Because it's allowing an awful lot of divine interaction. It's also allowing a lot of human interaction, but it's also allowing a huge bucket load of random chance, which can be disconcerting, because now, how do we handle the crossing of the sea? All right, which one of these models do you find best explains for us, justifies for us, gives a rationalization for what happened at the sea? No. It's hard, yes?
Yeah.
Right? Do we say that what happened at the sea is what happened at the sea because God made it happen, period? Or do we say what happened at the sea is what happened at the sea because that was what we deserved? Do we say what happened at the sea was just chance? We got lucky with the tides in the wind?
No.
Right? Or do we say that we got lucky with the tides in the wind, but that's nature is God's messenger, the Vilna Gaon's position?
Yes, all of it.
Well, we can't be all of it. They're mutually contradictory.
But it's not what happened.
Roofers.
Was not a normal occurrence, was it? Even with the tides and the wind. It's nothing you would see on an everyday or so basis.
The overtness of the strangeness of the crossing of the sea seems to imply that this is not the kind of thing that one would expect to ever see in the natural course of the climate and world affairs.
Right.
So that creates, so that seems to create that, well, no one's denying that God was there, right? We're not taking the first view of Rambam's list, which is to say it was all luck, right? That's off the books, because you did come to a synagogue to study, so you shouldn't be surprised that we are going to find God involved in this. But the question is, was it purely God? Was it God responding to us? Was it us doing something that created the opportunity? Was it, nature coordinated at the right time? Or was this an overt? It is a complicated ocean of possibilities. And there is no easy way to simply say, this is what it is. But how we look at it can affect how we choose to live. So we're going to continue with another selection taken from a different paragraph of Moreh Nevuchim, of Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed, which can turn us inward a little bit.
Divine providence is constantly watching over those who have obtained that blessing which is prepared for those who try to obtain it. If a man frees his thoughts from worldly matters, obtains knowledge of God in the right way, and rejoices in that knowledge, it is impossible that any kind of evil should befall him while he is with God and God with him. When he does not meditate on God, when he is separated from God, then God is also separated from him. Then he is exposed to any evil that might befall him. For it is only that intellectual link with God that secures the presence of providence and protection from evil accidents.
All right, so remember how we talked about God was always there and everything was perfect in response to and all of that? So that's great, which might make you think that if you're a good and righteous person that everything will be good. But Rambam is introducing another wrinkle to this, which is to say you have to be not perfect in your behavior, but in order to enjoy perfect providence, perfect protection, you also have to be constant. And I don't mean constant like day by day, but he means minute by minute in your understanding and focus on God. As soon as you're distracted by, gee, what do I want to have for lunch? You are susceptible to the random rumblings of this world, right? The world of chaos and chance is able to overcome you when you are not in that moment of perfect reflection on the state of the world, your soul, God, and everything in that balance.
There's the story about King David and his death that relates to this, that he was constantly, when he was getting advanced in age, he was constantly studying, believing as long as I maintain this connection, I'll be okay. And then one day he's in the garden, some construction happens, and he's, for a moment, his attention is diverted.
Right.
So that's when he...
There are numerous midrashim and stories from the sages that echo that same kind of sentiment. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who was the editor of the Mishnah and one of the greats of Jewish civilization, he was dying an especially painful death. And his students were all gathered together in prayer to try and keep him alive. But really, by the way the story is described, they were merely prolonging his pain and his death. And so his maidservant went up to the roof, dropped a vase, shattered, they broke their concentration, and his soul was able to depart. So the idea being that there is a way with perfect focus and concentration to prevent bad things from happening is a very powerful one. But also from that story in particular, we recognize that sometimes what we consider a bad thing happening is actually a necessary thing to happen. That is to say, delaying or prolonging a death is something that is not something that should be our goal. Very important story in modern medical things, and for the fine distinction that Judaism has of not hastening death, but also not prolonging death. That there is a significant difference between those two options at the end of life. Okay, we need to keep moving or we'll never make it through, and then we got to debrief all of this.
When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, the Philistines marched up in search of David. But David heard of it, and he went down to the fastness.
All right, so getting ready for another David war story here, right? Right. This is after Saul has died. David has become the king more or less, kind of unanimously, sort of. At least he's the last major contender. And the Philistines are like, okay, hey, the last king died. We killed him. Let's go kill the next guy. And so we're expecting David to do what Saul would do, which is when you hear of an army coming, you go out to meet it. Except David takes a detour.
David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hands? And the Lord answered David, go up, and I will deliver the Philistines into your hands.
And then shortly thereafter,
once again, the Philistines marched up and spread out over the valley of Rephaim. David inquired of the Lord, and he answered, do not go up, but circle around behind them and confront them at the baka trees. And when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the baka trees, then go into action, for the Lord will be going in front of you to attack the Philistine forces.
All right, so what's going on here?
Yeah.
All right, well, first of all, if you've read through the rest of the book of Samuel and 2 Samuel, you'll know this is very different than what Saul would do.
Yeah.
Right? Saul was the kind of guy that when he heard the Philistines were coming, would gather the troops, go out, and would fight them. He didn't do a whole lot of inquiring of God. That was one of his major character flaws. And this is being constructed by the author to show us the distinction between David's character and Saul's character. Now, is David looking for a miracle? What do you think?
Sounds like he's looking for direction.
Is that so different than a miracle?
He's looking for a partner.
Yeah, he's looking for help.
Yes, it is different.
His
No, I
helper.
don't know.
So if you ask for directions and someone gives you, like, I want to go to Disney World, right? And someone says, oh, we'll just go down I-4. And you go down I-4 and you get into an accident. Is it the person who gave you the directions' fault? Did God have that person give you the directions so you would get into an accident? What if the person gave you a weird set of directions to get to Disney World by some other road, and as you were driving, you heard on the radio that there was a major pileup on I-4? Was that a miracle that I avoided I-4 because that weirdo gave me this weird route?
Yeah.
Well,
I guess you could look at it like that.
I guess you could.
Either way.
Or if you're David, you can actually be recognizing that whatever happens is ultimately going to come with God's support or not if there's a failure. So I better try and see if I can have more information. And now, would David have not fought if he hadn't been given information, if he hadn't been given a response? No, of course he would have had to have fought in some way. But the idea that he was willing to look for additional information and would consider that information to be divine and therefore miraculous is what was setting him apart from Saul, who relied only upon his own judgment, usually to his own detriment. David is looking for additional help. By the way, all of you as well are looking for additional help, or else you wouldn't be studying Torah every week. You recognize that there is benefit from learning from our tradition to try and understand yourself, the world, and everything else that goes on. You're doing what David was doing. We don't have the Urim and Tumim, the stones that were used from the high priest to do this, but we do seek the same type of answers. And David continues in this pattern. We carry on.
David again assembled all the picked men of Israel, 30,000 strong. Then David set out to bring up from there the ark of God, to which the name was attached, the name Lord of Hosts enthroned on the cherubim.
All right, so same beginning, and really it's in the same section of the book of Samuel, right? He musters the troops and he goes out, except this time he's not going to war. What's he doing this time?
Covenant.
He's bringing the Ark of the Covenant up to Jerusalem, right, to the new seat of David's kingdom. But what step didn't he do?
He didn't ask God.
There was no inquiry.
Yeah.
He didn't ask God. And as we're going to see, the way he brings about the moving of the Ark is wrong, right? The one time he didn't ask, he does it wrong. Carry on.
They loaded the Ark of God onto a new cart.
Which is not the way you're supposed to move the Ark. The Ark is supposed to be carried by the Levites.
Right.
Oh, and conveyed, and Uzzah and Ahio guided the new cart. David and all the house of Israel danced before the Lord.
And there's a much longer description, which wouldn't fit in the page, of the dancing and the instruments that were used, which makes it seem a little frivolous. And it is in contrast to the way the description of how it will be brought up eventually, after the tragedy we're about to read happens. So there definitely seems to be a difference. This act of David here seems much more reminiscent of that time when we read about Saul, when he didn't wait for Samuel before he did the sacrifice. Right? It seems like David is making his own decisions, and he's treating the Ark as though the Ark was a talisman of just an honored cultural relic, rather than an actual symbol of God.
So he's dancing sort of like Miriam and the women danced with his tambourine.
No, they did fine. He's dancing a little more
because of why he's doing.
Think Mardi Gras, think Carnival, right? Which again was originally, and for some people still is, a religious moment, right? As they're preparing for their build up towards Easter, right? David seems to be treating it more on the carnival aspect rather than the Lent aspect. To borrow a metaphor from a different faith.
Robert,
yes.
I thought before David decided to go to Shiloh and get the ark, he consulted with Nathan, the prophet, and told him, I live in a palace.
That comes later, when he wants to build the actual Beit HaMikdash. That comes after this. He's already established the Mishkan in Jerusalem, and then he also realizes, I want to build something for God. And you're right, then he does talk to Nathan, and he gets the good idea. let your son do it, which is a whole nother discussion.
But when they came to the threshing floor of Nahon, Uzzah reached out for the ark of God and grasped it, for the oxen had stumbled. The Lord was incensed at Uzzah. God struck him down on the spot for his indiscretion, and he died there beside the ark of God.
Right, so another miracle. Or we're not comfortable calling this guy's punishment and death a miracle.
Seemingly innocent
Well,
move.
it is a
of
supernatural event, isn't it?
Yes.
And it does make a point that's important for the nation to remember and move forward better, right? Because if they had continued to treat the ark as though it was just this, commodity, a cultural artifact, just a symbol of the nation rather than a symbol of God, wouldn't it be likely that they would eventually get further and further and further from what God wanted? Wouldn't it be likely that David would continue more and more and more to do what he felt like rather than what God wanted him to do? If he got into the habit of not inquiring, right, of not leading as a king serving God, but as a king for whom the nation serves him, that was Saul's problem.
That's a warning.
This is a huge warning, and it's a turning point. And it's one that, unlike Saul, who when he messes up, finds excuses and doesn't ever really fix the problem, David fixes.
David was distressed because the Lord had inflicted a breach upon Uzzah. It was reported to King David, "The Lord has blessed Obed-Edom's house and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God." Thereupon David went up and brought up the ark of God to the city of David amid rejoicing. Right,
and the rejoicing is described in the rest of chapter 6 is a very different type of rejoicing. It is a much more appropriate rejoicing. So it's not about not being happy. Judaism loves rejoicing, loves being happy, but there's being happy and then there's being frivolous. And when we're supposed to be doing a religious act, we are supposed to be happy. You can be frivolous on your own time. But for example, with celebrations like Purim or Simchat Torah, sometimes people confuse these two activities. Right? There's such a thing as rejoicing, and there's such a thing as being stupid in your party. And David was getting too close in the first instance to being stupid party, and he ends up being right in the proper rejoicing party by the second half. All right, so it's hard to understand exactly what God's plan is in all of this. Right? What is God hoping to do? Did God control this? Did God make them bring the ark the wrong way to make the point? Or is God simply responding according to the behavior and the actions that they've done with a nudge in the right direction to put people on the right path? Right? I personally would argue for the latter. I think Rambam would as well. But there is room for lots of discussion. All right, one more wonderful story from the Talmud of why we shouldn't expect miracles to happen all the time in the way that they did in days of old, which is a question that I get a lot.
They say, when Torianos sought to kill Lulianos and Paphos, brothers in Lydia, he said to them, "If you come from the people of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah," which
were three people that were challenged by the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar,
"let your God come and save you from my power, as he saved them from the power of Nebuchadnezzar."
Right? Oh, if you guys are also righteous and you're, special Jews, blah, 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 then I suppose your God's going to save you because he saved them, right? Which is basically like, why won't your God do a miracle for you?
They said to him, "But they were completely righteous men and worthy of having a miracle done for them."
All right, so first off, modesty, right? Which is, we're not as good as them. So maybe they deserved a miracle. We cannot claim that we're so righteous that we deserve a miracle.
And moreover, Nebuchadnezzar was a great king and worthy of having a miracle done on his account.
Which is just a fascinating retort, which is to say, not only does the victim have to be righteous and worthy of a miracle, but if God is going to do a miracle in a way that will attach forever God's name to the persecutor, then the persecutor also has to be worthy of God's time. Right? Because God's not going to attach his name through some overt miracle that's going to be in the history books to some 2-bit tyrant. Right? God is only going to allow someone on that stage of a particular caliber of greatness. Again, greatness here doesn't mean goodness, but greatness meaning in a historical sense.
But a wicked man, that is you, is a common person and unworthy of having a miracle done on your account. And as for us, we deserve extermination from the God. Now, if you don't kill us, the God has at his disposal many others available to kill us, including bears and lions. The Holy One, blessed be he, has handed us over into your power only because someday he is going to avenge our blood from your hand. Even so, he killed them on the spot.
Sometimes having a good argument doesn't let you win.
Wow.
But notice the subtlety of what they're trying to say there, and how it bears back on this issue of Egypt, which is to say, look, if God wants us to die, God will find a way for us to die. Bear, lion, bus, whatever. You, on the other hand, Mr. Tyrant, you get to choose whether or not you're going to be that instrument or not. If you choose to be that instrument, that's because God is setting you up so that as you kill us, you gain demerit that will then be, you will be held accountable for. Right? God's giving you a chance to hang yourself on your own rope. And you can choose not to. And God will take care of us with wild beasts, and that's perfectly fine. Right? Because if God wants us dead, God can get us dead. You don't have to be the instrument to bring that about. And so too, when we summarize all of the devastation that befell Egypt and everything that happens to them then further at the sea, we can recognize that even though we say that God was helping to reinforce their courage was only letting them do what they believed was the right thing to do, which was enslave us and murder us. If they had not chosen to do that, then by being emboldened, they would not have been inspired to go out and do what they did. They would have simply let us go or not enslaved us in the first place. So the idea of what is the miracle here ultimately is coming down to the miracle of the people's choices. And the Egyptians chose to attack. The Egyptians chose to pursue. And that created the venue where God could then deliver us in a way that would seem miraculous to all of us. But ultimately, that's why God says to Moses, why are you crying out to me? It's not about you shouting loud enough to get my attention so I'll do a miracle. What you should be doing is go forward, right? Have faith that what will eventually be will be deliverance and salvation. It may look like you are trapped. It may look like you are in a desperate situation, but ultimately, God wants the world to be free. And that is the ultimate miracle, the greatest miracle that the Exodus is about. And that involves not sitting down and crying. That involves standing up and walking forward, even if it looks like you're walking into the water. And of course, it works. We just need to move forward.
Not be afraid.
Well, even if you are afraid, you can still move forward.
We followed
Right.
a guy named Nashon.
Yeah, as I often like to say, being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing what you should do anyway, even though you're afraid. Right? And that's really the courage that God is asking for us to do. And God is saying that he will meet us sort of halfway, right? That God has tilted the game to help that direction, the direction of justice and compassion and goodness win. But we also have to be willing to roll that way. And if we roll, we're going to find our way overall made more easily than if we're rolling the opposite direction away from how God has tilted the world.
Oh, yes, when they said they loaded the ark of God onto a new cart, you said it should have been
Correct.
it should have
Right.
been carried.
The Torah is very explicit about which of the different clans of the Levites were responsible for which things and which carts they used. It's one of the things the Torah spends a lot of time on that makes us scratch our head of why are we learning about this? But the Torah is very clear that we are supposed to use carts for some things, and for the ark in particular, we are not. That the ark is supposed to be carried by the
On
Levites.
our own shoulders.
Right.
They say it was loaded onto a new cart, so they had been using a cart.
Well, or no, the idea here wasn't that the cart was new, and therefore they've been using one in the past. New items were also considered to be A, better, and B, free from ritual impurity. So it was considered to be a clean cart, if you will. But that doesn't necessarily mean they had been using a cart. It just meant if they were going to suddenly want to use a cart, they wouldn't just use some old farmer wagon. They would use a prestigious cart, a new cart. So
the Rolls Royce of carts.
the Rolls Royce of carts, yes, exactly.
But
But that doesn't mean that they had been using carts in the past.
But it still would have been incorrect to use a cart. They should have carried
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
do
There was
it.
no cart that would have been appropriate for them to use.
Right.
They may have thought that they were doing the ark honor by putting it on a new cart and, the Rolls Royce of carts.
Right.
But as you said, the problem wasn't the cart wasn't good enough. The problem was they weren't doing as God had told us to do. Which, by the way, again, as I think we might have mentioned at some point in the past, if you think about it, carrying it on the shoulders is actually much more stable than carrying it on a cart, right? We have all-terrain legs, which are much more capable of handling rough terrain than a cart is. Carts need roads, legs don't. So there's a good reason, logical reason why God would ask for the ark to be carried as well, just for the safety of the ark, even above and beyond the issue of that's just what God said.
But even looking at it the other way, the Torah is ours to carry on our shoulders, not to put it behind us in a wagon and schlep it behind us in case we want to look at it. It's ours to carry on us.
So the symbolism is still very, very powerful. Yes, exactly. All right. Thank you. Keep looking for miracles.
Bye-bye.